8 months away from the game. No rhythm, no real game reps, just recovery, uncertainty, and questions about what she would look like when she finally came back. Add in the fact that she was dealing with illness on top of that, and this wasn't supposed to be a dominant return. This was supposed to be a slow rebuild, a cautious reintroduction. But what actually happened couldn't be further from that expectation. Because in her very first international start for Team USA, Caitlin Clark didn't just hold her own, she quietly became the most impactful player in the entire tournament. And not just by a small margin. We're talking about leading every single player across every national team in the competition in one of the most telling metrics in basketball. Not points, not highlights, the kind of number that reflects what actually happens when you're on the floor. The kind that shows whether your team is winning because of you. While other players were putting up stats, Clark was driving outcomes. Possession after possession, game after game, the results kept stacking in one direction. And the deeper you look into those numbers, the clearer the picture becomes. This wasn't a hot streak. This wasn't a one-game explosion. This was control. But here is where things start to feel off. Because while all of that was happening on the court, there was a completely different story unfolding on the sidelines. The same player who was now clearly elevating every lineup she was part of had spent the early part of the tournament with her role being carefully limited, her minutes managed, her touches controlled. Questions about her usage were being brushed aside. And then, without warning, the person responsible for those decisions was suddenly gone. No detailed explanation, no clear timeline, just a quiet shift that most casual viewers might not even catch unless they were paying close attention. One game, that coach is there, controlling the structure, keeping everything in a certain balance. The next game, a different voice is running the offense. Rotations look different, and suddenly Team USA isn't just winning, they're overwhelming opponents in a way that looks completely different from before. The ball is moving faster, the spacing looks cleaner, and most importantly, Clark is no longer being eased into the system, she's driving it. And that's where the real question begins. Because timing like this doesn't just happen randomly, not at this level. Not in a tournament where every decision is calculated and every role is defined long before the games even start. When a shift this noticeable happens right after rising pressure, right after visible frustration from fans and analysts, and right after a game where things clearly weren't working the way they should have, it forces you to look closer. Was this always part of the plan behind the scenes, or did something change because it had to? Because when you start connecting the performances, the rotations, and the sudden absence that nobody has fully explained, this stops looking like a normal adjustment. It starts looking like a moment where control shifted. And the most interesting part is, the answers aren't coming from press conferences or official statements. They're coming from the games themselves. The moment everything snapped into focus came against New Zealand. On paper, it looks like just another dominant Team USA performance, a 101-46 final score, a 55-point margin that most people would glance at and move on from. But that reaction completely misses what actually happened in that game. Because this wasn't just a blowout, this was a complete system reveal. From the opening minutes, the pace felt different. The ball was moving quicker. Decisions were being made earlier in the shot clock, and there was a level of control that hadn't been consistently visible in the earlier games. And right at the center of all of it was Caitlin Clark, quietly dictating how every possession unfolded. Not forcing anything, not chasing numbers, just reading the floor, making the right play, and letting the game come to her. If you only look at the basic stat line, it doesn't immediately jump off the screen. 14 points, 6 assists, 2 steals in just over 20 minutes. Solid, efficient, but not the kind of numbers that scream takeover at first glance. But that's exactly why this performance matters. Because the real story isn't in the raw totals, it's in how those numbers were produced and what happened when she was on the floor. Clark finished with the highest efficiency rating on the entire Team USA roster that night. Not tied, not close, clear separation. And that number captures everything, every scoring decision, every assist, every defensive read, every possession that ended better because she was involved in it. It's the closest thing to compressing the entire game into one metric, and she owned it.
But the stat that really tells you how the coaching staff viewed her impact wasn't written in the box score, it was written in the rotation.
Even with a lead that stretched past 50 points, even with a deep bench available, she played the most minutes on the entire team. Think about what that actually means. In a game that was completely under control, where most starters would typically see reduced time, she kept getting sent back onto the floor. That's not something you do if you're protecting a player or slowly building their confidence. That's something you do when your offense runs best through them, regardless of the score. And that decision speaks louder than any post-game quote ever could, because it shows that internally the evaluation had already shifted. This wasn't about easing her back anymore. This wasn't about balancing roles or distributing opportunities evenly. This was about winning as efficiently as possible. And the clearest path to doing that was having Clark on the court, controlling the flow over and over again. What makes this even more important is how complete her control actually was. She wasn't just scoring when opportunities appeared, she was creating them. She was anticipating defensive rotations before they happened, threading passes into spaces that only opened for a split second, and turning defensive reads into instant offense. Every steal, every transition push, every half-court decision, it all added up to something much bigger than the box score could fully capture. And once you see it through that lens, the 55-point margin stops looking like overkill and starts looking like evidence. Because margins like that don't happen by accident in international basketball. They happen when one team is operating at a completely different level of cohesion, pace, and decision-making. And in this game, that level was being set by one player. But as clear as that performance was, it also raised a bigger question. If she could control a game like this so effortlessly, why wasn't she being used this way from the start? And that's where the story begins to get even more interesting. For months, the conversation around Caitlin Clark had been built on a list of familiar criticisms. You've heard them all. Too one-dimensional, too reliant on outside shooting, questionable defense, high volume, low efficiency. A player who puts up numbers but doesn't necessarily elevate everything around her. Those narratives didn't appear overnight. They were repeated, reinforced, and stretched across every discussion about her game. And then, over the course of this tournament, every single one of them started falling apart in real time. Start with defense, because that's always been the easiest angle for critics to lean on. The idea was simple: target her, pressure her, and she becomes a weakness on that end of the floor. But what actually showed up on the court told a completely different story. She wasn't getting exposed, she was anticipating, jumping passing lanes, reading plays before they developed, turning defense into instant offense. The steals weren't accidental, they were calculated. And when you zoom out across multiple games, she's sitting among the team leaders in that category. That's not a liability, that's active defensive impact. Then there's the "she's just a shooter" argument, the one that tries to reduce her entire offensive game to what happens beyond the arc. But the numbers, and more importantly the film, don't support that anymore. She's attacking the paint, initiating contact, and living at the free throw line. You don't lead a team in free throw attempts by standing still on the perimeter. You get there by forcing defenders into uncomfortable positions, by driving into space, by making them react instead of dictate. That's a completely different profile than the one her critics have been describing. And then comes the efficiency argument, which might be the one that collapses the fastest under pressure. The claim has always been that she takes a high number of shots without converting at a consistent rate. But in this tournament, she's not just taking shots, she's making them at the highest percentage on the roster. That alone shifts the entire conversation. But what really breaks the narrative is what comes next. She's doing that while also leading the team in assists. Think about how those two things interact. High-efficiency scoring means you're making the right decisions with your own shot selection. Leading in assists means you're consistently creating better opportunities for others. Those two roles don't usually coexist at that level unless a player is fully in control of the offense. Because if you were forcing shots, your assist numbers would drop. If you were overly passive, your scoring wouldn't lead the team.
Balancing both at the top means you're reading the game correctly on nearly every possession.
And that's exactly what's been happening. Possession after possession, when defenses collapse on her, she's finding the open teammate. When they stay home on shooters, she's attacking the gap. When they hesitate for even a second, she's already made the decision. There's no wasted movement, no forced plays, just a constant stream of correct reads that keep the offense moving forward. At that point, the idea of her being a one-dimensional or inefficient player doesn't just feel outdated, it feels incompatible with what's actually unfolding on the court. And the more games you watch, the harder it becomes to hold on to any of those old narratives. Because they're not just being challenged, they're being replaced by something much more complete. A player who defends with intent, scores with efficiency, creates for others, and controls tempo without needing to dominate the ball in a predictable way. But even after all of that, even after dismantling every major criticism one by one, there's still one number that takes this entire conversation to another level. And once you see it, it becomes almost impossible to argue against what's really happening here. There's always that one number, the one that cuts through every argument, every opinion, every carefully crafted narrative, and forces the conversation into a completely different place. In this case, it's not points, not highlights, not even efficiency. It's plus minus. And what Caitlin Clark has done in that category during this tournament doesn't just stand out, it separates her from everyone else in the field. Not just Team USA, every team, every player, every country competing. She leads the entire tournament in plus minus. And this isn't one of those stats you can twist to fit a storyline. You can't inflate it with a few hot shooting stretches or pad it against weaker opponents over limited minutes. Plus minus tracks what actually happens when you're on the floor. It measures the scoreboard. When you're in the game, does your team pull ahead or fall behind? That's it. No interpretation needed. And across multiple games, against different opponents, in different situations, the answer has been consistent. When Clark is on the court, the gap widens. That kind of consistency matters because it removes randomness from the equation. Anyone can have a big scoring night. Anyone can string together a few impressive highlights, but leading an entire international tournament in plus minus means something deeper is happening. It means your presence is affecting every possession, whether you're the one taking the shot or not. It means your decisions are creating advantages that show up on the scoreboard, even if they don't always show up in traditional stats. And when you layer in the context, it becomes even harder to ignore. This is happening after 8 months away from competitive play. No gradual ramp-up, no extended adjustment period, just straight into international competition where the margin for error is smaller and the level of execution is higher. On top of that, she's playing through illness, something she confirmed after the New Zealand game, while still maintaining control over the pace, the spacing, and the flow of the offense. That's not just production, that's command. Because to lead in plus minus at this level, you have to impact both ends of the floor. You have to make the right read before the defense fully commits. You have to keep possessions alive, create second options, and avoid the kind of mistakes that swing momentum the other way. It's about stability as much as it is about playmaking. And possession after possession, that's exactly what she's been providing. What makes this even more revealing is that these numbers aren't hidden. They're not buried in advanced analytics that only a few people are tracking. They're being followed in real time. The Indiana Fever themselves have been highlighting her performances, documenting the impact, making it clear that what's happening here isn't going unnoticed internally. They know what this means. Because this version of Clark, the one controlling pace, balancing scoring with playmaking, and driving winning at a measurable level, is the version that's coming back with her. This isn't just a tournament run, it's a development leap happening in real time against international competition. And when you step back and look at it from that angle, the debate starts to fade. Because when one player is consistently producing the biggest positive swing on the scoreboard across an entire field of international talent, there's not much left to argue about. The numbers aren't trying to prove a point, they're just recording what's already happening. But while all of that was becoming clearer with every game, there was something else unfolding at the same time, something that didn't show up in any stat sheet. Because the biggest shift in this entire story wasn't just happening on the court, it was happening on the sideline. Up to that point, the story had been about performance, rotations, efficiency, impact, things you can track, measure, and break down frame by frame. But then the focus shifted, because something happened that didn't come with a stat, didn't come with a clear explanation, and didn't follow the usual pattern you expect at this level. The head coach was suddenly gone. Kara Lawson had been there through the opening stretch of the tournament, and her approach was consistent. Clark's role was controlled, minutes were managed, touches were balanced in a way that suggested the priority wasn't just winning, it was maintaining a certain structure, a certain distribution of responsibility. Even after strong performances, the messaging stayed the same. This wasn't about building everything around one player. It was about making sure everyone had space to contribute. And then came the Puerto Rico game. Puerto Rico didn't do anything overly complex. They showed a 2-3 zone with a very specific intention. Keep the ball out of Clark's hands. Force the offense to operate through other options. It's a strategy teams use when they identify a primary engine and want to disrupt it. The adjustment, in most cases, is straightforward. Increase that player's involvement in different ways, move her around, let her create from different angles, force the defense to collapse, and then exploit the gaps that a zone naturally leaves open. That adjustment never fully came. The rotation stayed mostly intact, the usage didn't spike the way you'd expect, and as the game unfolded, it felt like the system was being protected more than it was being optimized. The result wasn't a collapse, but it wasn't the kind of controlled dominance you'd expect from a roster with that level of talent either. And almost immediately, the reaction started building. Fans noticed it, analysts pointed it out, conversations across social platforms all started circling the same question. Why isn't the offense being run through the player who is clearly producing the most consistent impact? The pressure didn't disappear after the final buzzer. If anything, it grew louder. And then, without a formal announcement, without a detailed explanation from USA Basketball, the next game arrived, and Nate Tibbetts was the one running the team. Lawson, who had been present for the first 2 games, was suddenly absent. No extended statement, no clear timeline, just a quiet shift that changed everything about how the team operated. And almost immediately, the differences showed up where it matters most. The offense moved faster, the spacing looked cleaner. Clark's role expanded naturally, not forced, just integrated in a way that made every possession feel more fluid. And the results followed. A 34-point win, then a 55-point win. Not just victories, dominant, controlled performances that looked like a completely different version of the same roster. Now, to be clear, there has been no official confirmation explaining exactly why this change happened, and that's where the conversation shifts into what's being discussed rather than what's been formally stated. Some reports suggest Lawson may have stepped back voluntarily, possibly recognizing the growing pressure surrounding her decisions. Others believe the internal response to the backlash after the Puerto Rico game may have reached a point where a change, quiet or not, became necessary. Nothing has been definitively confirmed, but what is confirmed is what happened after.
The rotations changed, the offensive flow improved, Clark's involvement increased, and the margins of victory expanded dramatically. Those are not interpretations, those are outcomes sitting directly in the game results for anyone to see. And when you line those outcomes up with the timing of the coaching shift, it becomes harder and harder to treat this as a routine adjustment. Because at this level, changes like this don't just happen without a reason. They happen because something forces them to. And the deeper you look into how the team started functioning after that shift, the more it feels like the identity of the roster itself began to change. Once the coaching shift took place, the changes weren't limited to just one player's role. They showed up across the entire rotation. And one of the most noticeable shifts involved Angel Reese, a player who came into this tournament with clear expectations and a very defined identity. Reese's strengths are not a mystery. She's physical, relentless on the glass, and thrives in situations where the game slows down just enough for her to establish position and control space around the rim. In the right system, that kind of presence can dominate possessions, extend plays, and wear down opposing defenses over time. Early in the tournament, those qualities were part of the rotation in a more consistent way. The structure allowed for those half-court sequences, those interior touches, those moments where the game flowed through size and physicality. But after the shift on the sideline, the environment around her started to change. The pace picked up, the spacing widened. The offense began to prioritize quick decisions, early actions, and constant movement. Instead of settling into half-court sets, possessions were being initiated faster, often before the defense had time to fully organize. And in that kind of system, the value of each role starts to shift. Guards who can create instantly, pass on the move, and stretch the floor become central. The game speeds up, and everything revolves around keeping that tempo alive. Within that context, Reese's minutes began to dip, not dramatically all at once, but noticeably enough that people started connecting the dots. And this is where the conversation requires some nuance, because what was being observed wasn't officially addressed. There were moments, spread across multiple games, where viewers and analysts pointed out sequences that felt slightly off in terms of timing and flow. Situations where Caitlin Clark appeared open or in rhythm, and the ball didn't quite find its way there as expected. Instead, possessions would redirect, reset, or shift in a different direction. Now, to be clear, none of this has been formally confirmed as intentional. Basketball is a fast game, and split-second decisions don't always play out the way they look in hindsight. But the pattern showed up often enough that it became part of the broader discussion online. Film breakdowns highlighted it, fans debated it. Analysts questioned whether it was simply chemistry still developing or something more structural within the system itself. Under the new coaching approach, that entire dynamic seemed to resolve itself without needing a direct explanation. The offense became less about individual decision points and more about continuous movement. Quick reads replaced slower setups. The ball didn't stick in one place long enough for those same situations to repeat. And as a result, the system naturally leaned toward players who fit that tempo more seamlessly. Reese's skill set didn't disappear, it just wasn't being used in the same volume because the system itself had shifted priorities. And that's the key distinction. This isn't about talent, it's not about one player being better than another, it's about fit. Reese remains an elite interior presence with strengths that can completely change a game under the right conditions. But in a pace and space structure that emphasizes speed, spacing, and rapid decision-making, the roles compress differently. Some expand, others become more situational. What makes this particularly interesting is that the results of that shift are clearly documented. As the pace increased and the system leaned more heavily into guard-driven creation, the offense became more efficient, the margins of victory grew, the flow looked smoother, less interrupted, more connected from possession to possession. And while Reese's role adjusted within that structure, another development started to take shape at the same time, one that may end up being even more important to the long-term identity of this team. Because as one piece of the rotation became more situational, a new backcourt connection was quietly becoming impossible to ignore. While the frontcourt rotation was adjusting and the system itself was speeding up, something else was forming in real time, something that didn't need a headline to be obvious. It showed up in the spacing, in the timing, in the way possessions suddenly felt easier to execute. And at the center of it was the developing backcourt connection between Caitlin Clark and Paige Bakers.
What makes this pairing different isn't just talent, it's how naturally their games align. Both can handle the ball, both can create their own shot, both can read defenses a step ahead of where the play is going. But more importantly, neither of them needs to dominate the ball to be effective. That's where the shift happens. Instead of one player initiating and everyone else reacting, you get a constant exchange of control. One creates, the other adjusts. One draws pressure, the other instantly finds the gap. And you could start to see that rhythm building with each possession. There were sequences where Clark would push and transition, force the defense to collapse, and without hesitation, Bookers would already be in the right spot, either cutting into open space or setting up for a clean look. Other times, it flipped. Bookers initiated, pulled defenders toward her, and Clark was already reading the next layer, ready to exploit whatever opened up. That kind of chemistry doesn't come from set plays alone. It comes from shared instincts, from two players processing the game at the same speed. And once that connection started to click, everything around it became easier. Spacing improved because defenders couldn't cheat in one direction. Help defense became riskier because leaving either of them open came with consequences. The ball moved faster, not just because of system design, but because both players were making decisions instantly. There was no hesitation, no overthinking, just continuous flow. That's exactly what Nate Tibbetts leaned into with the three-guard lineup. Putting Clark, Bookers, and Kelsey Plum on the floor at the same time created a completely different problem for opposing defenses. Now, it wasn't just about stopping one primary initiator. It was about dealing with three players who could all shoot from range, all handle pressure, and all create off the dribble. There was no obvious weak point to target, no clear way to load up defensively without exposing something else. And in that setup, Clark naturally became the engine, not because she was forcing control, but because her decision-making consistently set the first action in motion. She was reading the floor early, identifying where the defense was shifting, and triggering the sequence that the other two guards could build off. It's a subtle kind of control, but it's incredibly powerful. Instead of holding the ball and dictating every move, she was initiating advantages that the entire lineup could capitalize on. The impact showed up quickly. Three-point shooting percentages climbed, driving lanes opened, assist numbers reflected cleaner, more efficient opportunities. The offense didn't just look better, it felt more connected, more synchronized. Every possession had multiple options, and the defense was constantly one step behind trying to keep up. And this is where it becomes bigger than just one tournament, because what Clark and Bookers are building here isn't limited to a few games or a temporary system. This is the kind of on-court understanding that carries forward. The reads, the spacing awareness, the timing, it all compounds with experience. The more they play together, the sharper it gets. And even beyond international play, that kind of development shapes how Clark approaches every system she steps into moving forward. What started as a rotation adjustment quietly turned into a structural advantage, and once that backcourt chemistry locked in, it didn't just improve the offense, it redefined what this team could look like at its best. What's happening here doesn't stay in this tournament. It doesn't just disappear once the final buzzer sounds or get filed away as a strong international showing. This version of Caitlin Clark, the one making faster reads, controlling tempo, balancing scoring with elite playmaking, is coming back with her. And that has real implications for the Indiana Fever and the entire WNBA landscape. Because what she's building right now is different from what we saw before the injury. Before, the conversation was about potential, about flashes, about what she could become with more time, more reps, more experience at the professional level. Now, that projection is starting to turn into something much more concrete. She's not just reacting to defenses anymore, she's anticipating them. She's not just creating plays, she's controlling the structure those plays exist in. That's a completely different level of command. And the biggest shift is how comfortable she looks running a full pace and space system. In this tournament, she's been forced to process international defenses, different schemes, different spacing rules, quicker rotations. That kind of environment accelerates development. Every possession demands quicker decisions. Every mistake gets punished faster. And instead of struggling through that adjustment, she's using it to sharpen her instincts. The reads are cleaner, the timing is tighter, the decision-making is faster.
That's exactly the kind of growth that translates directly back to the WNBA. Because when she returns to Indiana, she's not just bringing improved stats, she's bringing a new level of control over the offense itself. The ability to dictate pace, to manipulate spacing, to create advantages before the defense even fully sets.
And when a player at her position reaches that level, it doesn't just elevate their own performance, it reshapes the entire team's identity. Teammates get easier looks, transition opportunities increase, defensive pressure shifts because opponents have to account for her earlier in the possession. Everything starts to revolve around that central engine. And the Fever know it. The way they've been tracking her performances during this tournament isn't just routine support, it's recognition. They're watching a version of their franchise player evolve in real time against high-level competition. They're seeing the gap between where she was and where she's heading start to close faster than expected. And it doesn't stop there, because the chemistry she's building, especially with players like Paige Bookers, is shaping how she approaches decision-making at a broader level. Learning to operate alongside another high IQ guard, adjusting to shared creation responsibilities, reading off another elite playmaker. Those are experiences that expand how she sees the floor. Even when she's back in a different system, those instincts don't disappear, they stay. So when you zoom out, this isn't just about one tournament run. This is about a player taking a visible step from high-level talent to full offensive engine. From someone who can take over games to someone who can control them from start to finish. And when that kind of leap happens, it doesn't just impact one team, it shifts expectations across the league. Because now the question isn't whether she can dominate, it's how many teams are actually prepared to deal with the version of her that's coming next. At a certain point, a narrative doesn't just get challenged, it collapses under the weight of what's actually happening. And that's exactly where things stand right now with Caitlin Clark. Because every major criticism that followed her into this tournament has now been tested in real time, and none of them have held up. The injury concerns? Gone. 8 months away from the floor was supposed to create rust, hesitation, a slow ramp back into form. Instead, she stepped into international competition and immediately controlled games against elite-level structures. Not surviving, dictating. The health questions? Gone. Playing through illness in the middle of the tournament didn't slow her down. It barely registered in her performance. The pace stayed the same. The decision-making stayed sharp. The impact never dipped. The defensive doubts? Gone. Not just neutralized, reversed. She's not being targeted as a weakness. She's creating turnovers, reading passing lanes, and turning defense into offense with precision. That entire narrative doesn't just look outdated now, it looks disconnected from reality. The volume shooter label? Gone. Because you can't lead a team in efficiency while also leading in scoring if you're forcing shots. That contradiction alone dismantles the argument. And when you add in the assist numbers, when you see how often she's creating for others instead of chasing her own offense, it becomes even clearer. This isn't a one-dimensional scorer. This is a complete offensive engine. And then there's the biggest one of all, the idea that her impact doesn't translate to winning at the highest level. That argument doesn't survive a single look at the numbers anymore, because leading an entire international field in plus-minus isn't a subjective achievement. It's not based on opinion, it's not influenced by narrative, it's the scoreboard reflecting what happens when you're on the floor. And across multiple games, against multiple opponents, the result has been consistent. When Clark plays, her team separates. That's not hype, that's outcome. But what makes this moment even more significant isn't just that the narratives are gone, it's how they disappeared. They weren't addressed in interviews, they weren't debated away in press conferences, they were erased by performance, by possession after possession of controlled, efficient, winning basketball that left no room for interpretation. And at the same time all of that was happening, the coaching situation that had been quietly limiting her role shifted in a way that nobody has fully explained.
That part still hangs over everything. Because while the narratives around her game have been completely dismantled, the question of why she was being held back in the first place hasn't been answered in plain language. The timing of the change, the immediate improvement in team performance, the way the offense opened up, it all points to something deeper than a routine adjustment. And the organization hasn't clarified it. But the games have, the results have, the margins have.
So now, heading into the next stage of this tournament, especially a matchup like Spain, which presents a completely different level of challenge, the conversation shifts again. Not about whether she can perform, that question is already settled. Not about whether she belongs at this level, that's been answered repeatedly. The only question left is how far this version of her can push it. Because at this point, the old narrative isn't just weakened, it's officially gone. What makes this entire situation so compelling is that it still doesn't feel complete. Usually, by the time a player dominates like this, the story settles. The narrative becomes clear, the roles are defined, and everything moves forward in a predictable direction. But that's not what's happening here. With Caitlin Clark, it feels like we're watching something unfold in real time that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. Because this was never just about the numbers. Yes, the stats are overwhelming. Yes, the impact is undeniable. Yes, every major criticism has been erased by what's happening on the court. But running parallel to all of that is a second storyline that hasn't been fully explained. The sudden shift on the sideline, the quiet disappearance of Kara Lawson, the immediate change in how the team operates under Nate Tibbetts, and the fact that none of it has been addressed directly in a way that closes the loop. That part still lingers. Because when you have a situation where performance spikes, rotations change, and outcomes improve almost instantly after a shift like that, it naturally raises questions. Was this always part of a larger plan that just wasn't visible early on? Or did something behind the scenes accelerate a decision that wasn't supposed to happen this quickly? There are no confirmed answers, and that uncertainty is exactly what keeps this story open. At the same time, the basketball side of it continues to evolve. Every game adds another layer. Every possession reinforces the same pattern. Clark isn't just performing, she's building something. A level of control, a rhythm, a command of the game that keeps getting sharper the more she plays. And the deeper this tournament goes, the more pressure there is on opposing teams to find an answer that so far hasn't appeared. The Spain matchup looms as the next real test, a different style, a more disciplined defensive structure, the kind of opponent that forces adjustments and exposes any weakness that still exists. And if the same patterns hold, if the same level of control shows up again, then this conversation shifts one more time, from impressive run to something much bigger. Because at that point, it's no longer about proving anything. It's about establishing something. And when you zoom out, that's really what this entire moment represents. Not just a return from injury, not just a strong international performance, but the beginning of a version of Clark that operates at a level where she doesn't just fit into a system, she defines it. The only thing we know for sure right now is that this story isn't finished. The coaching situation hasn't been fully explained, the tournament hasn't reached its final chapter, and Clark's trajectory, based on everything we've seen so far, is still moving upward, still evolving, still revealing new layers with every game. So the real question isn't what just happened, it's what happens next.